Request a roll call vote. During any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted briefly. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which their hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the board, please send it to the email listed in today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you. The first item on our agenda is public comment. And we do have several speakers. The first person is Harold Clems, 6 North Allen Street, Madison, in support and wishing to speak.
All right, Harold, you are unmuted on our end. You might have a prompt to unmute yourself.
Okay, I think now I should be unmuted.
Yes, you're on.
Apologies. Thank you very much for providing me this opportunity to provide input in terms of disclosures. I'm board president of Madison Bikes and I'm a member of the Transportation Commission. However, I'm representing only myself here. So I was very heartened to see that the Plan Commission is dedicating a special meeting to this topic and doing it together with the Transportation Policy and Planning Board. As someone who probably spends way too much time following city meetings about traffic, about transit, about where we locate development, what that development looks like, and so on, I think I've really come to realize that looking at these issues in isolation doesn't get you anywhere. If, for example, we create affordable housing, but it's at the edge of town in a place that you can only reasonably get to by car, then, well, your goal of reducing vehicle miles traveled, you're not going to achieve that. Or conversely, if you build a bus rapid transit route, as we're currently in the process of planning and doing, but all the development along the route are low density, or they have huge parking lots in front of them and the parking is free, then we're not going to achieve our goals with regard to climate change, livability, and affordability. And I must say, if you look at the recent past, really there hasn't been a lot of real change in the right direction in those sectors. If you look at the data on vehicle miles traveled, if you look at climate gas emissions, or the commute mode share, how many people travel by single occupancy vehicle, I think it's pretty obvious that Madison hasn't moved in the right direction. And I think a big reason for this is that we have treated these different issues as separate rather than as part of a comprehensive project. And so based on the meeting materials that I've reviewed that were uploaded into Legistar, I mean, I'm very much looking forward to seeing the presentations. I think you're on the right track. I think if we simultaneously tackle things like on-street parking, off-street parking policies, parking minimums, transit-oriented development, and transportation demand management, we really have a chance of moving toward the goals that we have formulated in the comprehensive plans and in many other city plan documents that we have adopted. The approach that I'm seeing in there seems to be based on evidence of what works, on best practices, what other cities are using, what has worked there. And so I'm very much in support of that. And again, I commend the Commission for doing this work. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the final results of this and how it will be adopted at the city level and make our city a better place. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next registrant is Greg May, 426 West Wilson Street, Madison, in support and wishing to speak, representing 350 Madison. And just a reminder, 3 minutes.
There's no person currently in the meeting with that name.
Okay, then moving on to our next registrant, Bill Connors, 25 West Main Street, Madison, neither support nor oppose, wishing to speak, representing Smart Growth Greater Madison. Mr. Connors, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak about this subject. just want to, I'm focusing more on the transportation demand management proposal, which I know at this point a little bit more about than any of the other parts of the agenda. I just want to emphasize to the members of the commission and committee that any costs imposed by that new transportation demand management program or any other kind of land use requirement regulation, whether under current ordinances or that new program, those costs must be passed on to the tenants, residential tenants and commercial tenants. And in the case of commercial tenants, the employees, like for example, if you're buying bus passes, the employees getting the bus passes aren't the employees of the developer, they're the employees of the tenant. And so the tenant business will have to pay for those under some sort of arrangement in the lease, in the commercial lease, or otherwise the project won't be able to go forward because the lender is going to insist that those kind of costs be recovered through the rents. Right now, we are well aware that parking demand is way down, transit use is way down. The number of vehicle trips for commuting are way down because of COVID-19. And we really don't know after COVID-19 gets over with what the world is going to look like. How many people are going to be working from home versus coming back to the office. So it's very difficult to predict, how to tailor a program to a world that we haven't seen yet. I did send an email to plan commissioners suggesting a way to deal with that, but in the near term, we really don't need the sort of transportation demand management. We'll need it possibly sometime down the road, but we won't know how much until we get there. Next point is that we have a concern that under the way that program has been suggested, that certain points will be awarded essentially for free to development in the core city, but if it's a development at the periphery, those automatic points are not going to be available, and that may have the effect of encouraging new development that would maybe be around the periphery to actually locate out in the suburbs, which is not good for Madison. Finally, I'd like to point out that, or make a request that, the city has been adding one layer after another of requirements and costs on development.
Mr. Connors, that concludes your 3-minute time limit. Thank you very much. Is there a Greg May that's registered yet, Jesse?
I don't see a Greg May. We do have another name that's listed that is not registered. If you want to see if that's a person and they just haven't corrected the name. There's an additional person is what I'm saying.
That is registered to speak, you mean?
No, that's not registered, but it has a link. So I'm assuming that maybe they use that link to get on. If we could just...
okay, let's see if that's Mr. May. Could you... Mr. May?
Oh, yeah. Hi, yeah, I have my boss's email and I was unable to change my name. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you for figuring it out. I appreciate that. Anyway, I got my 3 minutes, so I'll get to it. First, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak today and for your willingness to explore TDM policies in Madison. I'm Greg May. I'm a downtown resident, and I'm speaking today as a member of 350 Madison. As many of you know, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said that we must keep warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. We have limited time to do this, maybe a decade or fewer to get below 26% of our 2005 level of emissions. Transportation is Wisconsin's second biggest contributor to climate change. And nationwide, a majority of the transportation emissions, just under 60%, come from personal vehicle travel. Soon, with the closing of coal plants, we expect personal vehicles will be the single largest contributor to our climate emissions. So there's no silver bullet solution with transportation. Electric vehicles will take decades to be implemented. Even if we sold 100% of electric vehicles today, it would still take 20 or 30 years for all these cars to filter out. And so we need to take a holistic approach, one that supports all modes of travel, not just personal vehicles. And looking nationwide, no one has built their way out of congestion. Let's not make the same mistake. We need to support walking and biking infrastructure wherever we can. We know that 21% of vehicle trips travel less than 1 mile. That's a distance that can be traveled in 30 minutes by walking. So 21% of our vehicle trips could be achieved by walking. Another 24% of vehicle trips travel between 1 and 3 miles. This is a distance that can be biked in 30 minutes or less. So 24% of our trips are bikeable. And for trips over 3 miles, we should support transit wherever possible. Now, I don't need to lecture the Plan Commission on the connection between our land use and transportation. That being said, what we build today will last for decades. A parking spot built today could be around for 50 plus years. Even fringe development, if we build it now, will lock in congestion and emissions. We will be completely unable to manage climate change, sprawl, and congestion if we stick to the status quo. I want future Madisonians to live in a healthier, more sustainable Madison, and this TDM ordinance is one of the best ways to address the problem. We know that the Plan Commission faces backlash when trying to change the status quo. Developers represent a powerful interest, and neighborhoods fight over parking. But know that many in Madison have your back. We want a sustainable city that supports multimodal transportation. Please consider and support the policies being discussed here today. Do the right thing. That means supporting the TDM ordinances, parking restrictions and requirements being changed, and the transit-oriented development overlay. If we don't start working now, we will be left with a transportation network that is congested, produces too many emissions, and contributes to sprawl. Let's build a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. May. We have one other registrant, Thomas Wilson, Clark Court, Madison, neither support nor opposed, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Are there questions for any of the registrants? Ms. Stouter? You're muted. There.
Yes, I see just one other registrant not wishing to speak is Allison Lindsay Mayers of Bashford Avenue, and she is also available, well, not available to answer questions.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. Any questions for any of our registrants? Seeing none, thank you very much for joining us, registrants. Appreciate your input. So the next item on our agenda is disclosures and recusals. Members of the body should make any required disclosures or recusals under the city's ethics code. Do we have any disclosures or recusals? Seeing none, then we will move on. Oh, wait. Commissioner Sundquist.
Yeah, this is a disclosure that in my day job, we secured a grant that we have used to work with staff on the TDM ordinance, or what might become an ordinance, but that I don't have any financial interest in it, in the outcome, but just thought people should know.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Okay, the next item on our agenda is special item of business. We do have a lot on our agenda, as is typical for these big picture Plan Commission meetings. As has been noted by a number of people, COVID has disrupted travel patterns, maybe forever. We will hear from Greater Madison Metropolitan Planning Organization with early information about what some of the travel pattern changes may be. And this could help feed our thinking about transportation demand management. In regard to transportation demand management, we will get a presentation that includes background research and a recommendation on a possible approach to TDM in Madison. It would be helpful to get plan commissioners' thoughts about the program concept, any additional ideas that commissioners might have, and get your thoughts about where we should go from here. That will help set our direction going forward. In regard to parking, as we know from testimony at our regular Plan Commission meetings, parking is a frequent concern of neighborhoods from all around the city regarding new development proposal. Both parking and traffic tend to be items that we hear about from neighborhoods. Transportation demand management could result in exacerbating that issue unless we make associated changes in our on-street parking approach. So to increase the likelihood of any TDM changes succeeding, on-street parking should be addressed in conjunction with our TDM changes, any TDM changes. Given the complexity of the parking issue, which you probably got an idea of from reading some of the documents that we have. So given that complexity, it is likely that we will have to have additional meetings on this topic. However, it would be helpful in preparation for any such future meetings to give direction to staff about further information that you think would be helpful, or if further staff concepts on possible program changes would be helpful. It would be good to let staff know that. In regard to the transit-oriented development, which is on our agenda, and the concept of overlay zoning, obviously, this is also a very important land use issue. We may or may not have time to get to an overview of that. If we don't, it will appear on an agenda in the near future. So with that, I will turn the microphone over to Tom Lynch, our Director of Transportation in Madison, and he can give us a bit of information too from his perspective before we move forward. Tom, you are muted. If you cannot unmute yourself, raise your hand and I will. Okay, there. Can you raise your hand? There.
Okay. Good. So I won't speak too much regarding Zia's presentation on travel trends since with COVID-19. It's very interesting. It'll be an interesting 10 minutes, but I'm going to go ahead and jump right to the transportation demand management section and give a little bit of an introduction. I think for about probably easily 20 to 30 years, there's been a desire through policy boards and staff to implement transportation demand management. But we really haven't had or figured out a consistent system for doing it. I remember doing transportation demand management programs as a consultant, 15 or 18 years ago. And I wonder what happened to them and what became of them. And so because there's an unclear system on how we do transportation demand management, it's become unclear for those who want to invest in our community, developers, right? So they want to get their project approved. They work with staff, and staff tries to give them some guidance, right? But doesn't want to do it for them. They might come to a committee meeting or the plan commission meeting with what they think is acceptable. But then there's commissioners that might have other ideas, right? So then they go back and then they might have to come back to the planning commission or be referred to the transportation commission, you know, and sometimes that even results in appeal to the common council. And so what ends up happening is that it ends up being very unpredictable for developers. It's hard on staff because staff isn't quite sure what the policymakers want, right? And then it can end up in long meetings, right? Long meetings for the planning commission, long meetings for the council as they try and determine what's enough. And then also for the developer, it can end up costing money. You know, I was a consultant that used to do transportation demand management programs, and you know, we'd get paid for it, but that was money that maybe could have gone into maybe TDM efforts rather than consultant fees and reports. So what we've done is there's been a lot of cities that have figured out kind of a standard predictable path, you know, that have been effective. You know, Arlington, Virginia has been doing it for 30 years and it's worked very well, and it's been very effective in reducing vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. And San Francisco has done similar things. And so with the help of Bloomberg Harvard Fellowship, SSTI, and some staff time, we've kind of surveyed some of the best practices around the nation and how they do it. And what they've done is they basically standardized a process that seems to be working. It seems to be effective. It seems to be predictable, and it provides a clear pathway for developers who want to invest in our community. So we're excited about this. We think it would just be, we think it'll lead to fewer long-lasting meetings, you know, that go into the night. And it probably will be easier for staff as they try and guide developers on how to arrange their development so that we have something that's sustainable, right? Something that encourages active transportation and transit, isn't overly burdensome, and something that's very predictable. So that's actually my introduction to the TDM. Parking, we will continue to work with parking, and I suspect we'll be in front of you again with parking as well as the TOD. But I did want to give that introduction for the TDM. So on that note, what is it? Maybe I guess it goes now to Zia to.
Yeah, the first presentation that we have. Thank you very much, Tom. The first presentation that we have is by Zia Brukaya. Sorry, I have a hard time with your last name, Zia, who's going to tell us about the MPO remote work survey. So Zia, hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to present on this tonight. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen and see if this works. Okay, does that look good?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to the discussion tonight, and my presentation will be sharing the results of the regional telework survey that we did in June. So I'm Zia Brukaya. I'm with the Greater Madison MPO. Very recently, the Madison Area Transportation Policy and Planning Board. And I manage our transportation demand management program, which is currently called Rideshare, et cetera. That also went through a rebrand. And so in 2021, you'll start to hear about Round Trip. So that will be the new program name. And so this was done as a part of that transportation demand management work that we do. I'm going to say TDM from here on to keep it shorter. But so this was a 3-week survey between June 9th and the 30th. This was conducted throughout the region, so we promoted it widely. The goal was to get feedback from any and everybody, really at all levels of an organization. So looking at executives, managers, and then staff. And the purpose was really twofold. The first piece was taking this unique opportunity. I mean, COVID is such a blip in time, really, and a very unique situation. And so we were seeing surveys that were being done all around the nation at the national level and then in other regions, and wanting to gather information that's really specific to our region to see what are the similarities and if there are any differences in the way that COVID-19 was impacting current and future potential workplace organization. And then also identifying some of the key challenges, benefits, and then resources that we could focus on with our TDM program to promote to employers and employees to support the ongoing adoption of telework if it was in fact working out pretty well. So what we found, we received almost 1,900 responses. 99% of the people who responded were actively working at the time. As a reminder, so this was basically conducted in June. The Safer at Home order first went into place on March 25th. And then it was kind of re-upped and extended until May 26th. So when we were asking people for responses, we were really focusing on this is the height of the restrictions during the pandemic and how are you operating and how's that going for you? We received a nice spread between of the responses between executives, about 11%, managers, 16%, and then non-managers, about 3/4 of the respondents. And also a good spread of the different sizes of organizations. So the top bar in green is organizations with fewer than 10 staff, all the way down to the tan bar, second from the bottom, that's organizations with 10,000 or more staff. The two biggest groups that we heard from were between 50 to 250 and then 1,000 to 5,000. We definitely received large bumps when we sent this out through the city of Madison staff and Dane County. So I think we have great representation from those two, but definitely across public, private, and nonprofit. So the home zip codes, this is where people were living, quite dispersed throughout the county and beyond the county. The greatest percentage was 12% of respondents reporting from the 53704 or Northeast Madison zip code. And then the workplace zip codes were much more concentrated with the largest percent, 38% working in downtown Madison. So 5% of people were reported living in downtown, but 38% working in downtown. And getting a sense of what were the habits prior to COVID-19, this is probably no surprise really for our region, but 74% of people were primarily driving alone and were either commuting between 15 to 30 minutes. About a third were commuting over 30 minutes. And then the graph on the chart on the right shows a breakdown by the size of organization. So what's interesting here is that if you look, so this goes from the smallest organization at the top down to the largest at the bottom. And the largest organizations tended to have lower rates of people driving alone to work. So the green bar is what percent of people reported driving alone. So definitely seeing more carpooling and bus and biking and walking in those larger organizations. When we asked how common remote work was prior to COVID-19, only 9% of respondents said that it was either somewhat or very common. So this shows what a massive shift this was for the majority of people in our region. A full third said that remote work was simply not allowed at their organization. And then almost 40% said it was allowed, but not common. And when you look at surveys and studies from kind of other regions and nationally, there are a lot of reasons why that occurs, but a lot of times people are, if it's allowed but not common, it's because people are feeling maybe unsupported by the technology that they have available to them, or their ability to work at home from the setup that they would have at home, and as well as things that are a little bit more social and cultural around, do they feel like they might be overlooked for a promotion if they're seen as someone who works from home more often than their compatriots. And so then here we look from left to right. On the left is prior to COVID-19. On the right is at the height of restrictions. And this is showing essentially a 180-degree flip. So prior to COVID-19, 78% of the respondents reported never working from home. And then that went to 80% working from home at least 1 day per week during COVID. Another piece that's really interesting here, again, to what a massive shift this was, is that 83% of executives and managers did not supervise employees who work remotely. And that's been a huge barrier to the adoption of remote work at organizations nationwide, is that concern about how do you communicate, how do you manage, what does that look like, how do you know what people are doing? So what we learned is that there were a number of questions asking about challenges when you sort of group them into categories. The biggest one was lack of access to equipment and a quality workspace. I mean, this was a very unexpected and very quick shift. So people just really weren't set up for remote work. Second was barriers to communication and collaboration. So having to figure that all out brand new with everybody working from home. And then third were either real or perceived negative impacts to workplace culture and social connectivity. So there were some comments about how are people dressing when they're on a Zoom call versus if they were in a meeting, people missing their friends and coworkers. And we asked about personal challenges. One of the points here is that, well, I'll show challenges on this slide and then benefits on the next slide. The benefits were definitely reported at higher rates than the challenges. The largest challenge here is very COVID specific. It's anxiety about the COVID-19 crisis. And then the third one in yellow is also very COVID specific. It's frequent distractions from kids and dogs and spouse because everybody's at home. Struggling to unplug was the second largest one. And so kind of figuring out that balance between work and life. So then the positive benefits, you see here, a lot of them that ranked pretty highly. The top one is saving money by not commuting. That's what that one is. Second is having more time with family and friends and so on, which when we put those into buckets, the top benefits being overall people were saving time and money, and then they were using those savings to do other things, whether it's more time for sleeping or chores or exercising or cooking meals, and they were enjoying that. The second piece was feeling greater comfort and less stress. So people enjoying wearing comfortable clothing, not having the stress of the commute, in some cases not having stress of kind of uncomfortable interpersonal relationships at the office. And then third was greater personal and professional satisfaction. So people reporting that they're feeling good about life and then also feeling good about the job that they're doing. And so when business returns to normal, 79% of respondents said they would prefer to work at home at least 1 day per week. And then that breaks down into almost thirds, people saying maybe 1 to 2 days, 3 to 4 days, 20% saying 5+ days. And this is very consistent with other national surveys that we've seen. The sweet spot seems to be about 2 to 3 days per week, where people can work at home for 2 to 3 days, have that good heads down time, feel comfortable, feel focused, but then have 2 to 3 days where they're in the office collaborating, nurturing social connections, and seeing people. 69% also said they'll view an employer more favorably if they have the option to work remotely. So for employers, that speaks right to talent recruitment and retention. This is what people are going to be looking for moving forward. And this box here is interesting too. 41% of respondents saying that their overall feelings of life satisfaction have improved. And so that is, there are studies that show when employees are happy, they do better at work. And so those are some of the thinking about the benefits for employers. What employers and managers or executives and managers are anticipating is that about 70% are to anticipate that more employees will work from home. This is after COVID goes away. So what happens when COVID leaves? Anticipating still more work from home, 27% saying more employees will work from home nearly full time. And then these bottom numbers are showing that executives and managers are feeling good about how efficient people are being, which is a good test of what those previous fears tended to be around. Is this going to work? Are people going to actually do their work? And how is that all going to occur? And so we're seeing that that's been going pretty well. So for TDM, when we've been thinking about this at the MPO and talking with partners, is that we find really valuable in this information is that we can now see what the real impact of telework has been in what is, in fact, a very unique and even more challenging situation than it would normally be. So we're seeing that it is possible and that there are many benefits that accrue both to individuals and to employers. We see this as a really unique opportunity to encourage these new habits and encourage momentum behind them. One of the big focuses of our TDM program is encouraging and supporting employers in their work to promote transportation options other than driving alone at the workplace. So telework being one of those. And then third is that we want to recognize that telework is not a silver bullet for reducing vehicle miles traveled. It does have to occur. We're encouraging this in the context of other sustainable land use and transportation policies, because there are a lot of unknowns. There are some studies that show that in some cases, if people have the option to telework, they may end up moving further away from a city center, and therefore the rest of their trips become longer, or they don't become chained trips. So it's one here, one there versus 2 or 3 things knocked off the list altogether. So these are things that we want to keep in mind and not act like telework is going to be the fix. But it does certainly have great potential to really help reduce VMT in the region. And then where we're going with this is we're just trying to share this information as widely as possible. Done a number of presentations so far. We'll be doing a presentation with Sustained Dane in the coming months. Connecting with employers, connecting people with resources, or producing our own resources to support and promote telework and explore partnerships. So that's all that I have, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Are you going to be around for the rest of the meeting, Sia?
Yes.
Okay. There may be questions that come up later then. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is the TDM Overview. Cherubi Begwani and Sumya Jean. Okay, Cherubi, if you could raise your hand, I could then unmute you. Sumya, did you want to go ahead and get started? Here, I found Cherubi. Okay, Cherubi and Soumya. Yeah.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. My name is Charvi. I've been working with the City of Madison and specifically the Department of Transportation through the Bloomberg Harvard Fellowship in the summer. And then I transitioned to SSTI, and I've been working on developing the TDM and TOD programs. I'll be joined in this presentation with Soumya, who's a transportation researcher at SSTI. And just to give a quick introduction to SSTI, it's a joint program under the University of Wisconsin-Madison and Smart Growth America. And we work with practitioners in state and local transportation agencies to operationalize new, more sustainable practices suggested by research. And I've been working with Eric and Soumya on the TDM program. And through SSTI, Eric has also previously helped develop a TDM program for Los Angeles. So just going to start now with Soumya. We'll be running you through the details of a possible citywide TDM program for Madison. Next slide, please. So we'll be starting with a brief overview of ongoing TDM efforts in Madison and why a TDM program is needed for the city. We'll then talk about some of the successful programs that are being implemented in a couple of other cities, and then elaborate the possible steps in the TDM program for Madison. Soumya will then be providing some hypothetical examples to illustrate how the TDM mechanism would potentially work for projects in Madison, and she'll give an example using San Francisco's TDM tool. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, TDM, or Transportation Demand Management, has several definitions given by different institutes and bodies. Increasing transportation system efficiency, maximizing traveler choices, reducing the number and length of auto trips, and also handling congestion. So looking at these and various other available definitions, the primary purpose for Madison's TDM program can be broadly summarized as being needed to mitigate, go to the next slide, please. As being needed to mitigate the negative impacts of system-wide traffic resulting from major land use changes by providing sustainable transportation choices, infrastructure, and services. And the aim would not only be to mitigate impacts of system-wide traffic, but also to look at and address proactively some of the localized issues of safety, livability, and multimodal access. Some of the key community benefits have been summarized through the following objectives. So mitigating vehicle miles traveled, or essentially reducing the number of vehicular trips, supporting multimodalism and more equitable access by encouraging alternative transportation modes such as biking, walking, and transit, reduction of congestion, travel delay, and air emissions, and supporting TOD, or transit-oriented development and infill, and finally addressing public safety impacts. Next slide, please. So, city requires some forms of TDM, including bike parking and direct pedestrian access for all new developments. And it requires some specific measures and extensive measures in some other cases. So as you can see here, the city's land use ordinances currently creates potential TDM requirements for conditional uses, and this has been ongoing for the past 15 years. And some other uses such as planned developments, big box stores and employment campus, and mixed-use center districts. So the requirements vary for these land uses, and some of them are optional and depend on the discretion of the city staff. Next slide, please. More broadly, transportation impact mitigation may be required of any development, but as Tom mentioned previously, such requirements lack consistent standards and predictable application. The city is therefore looking at reforms in the process and requirements, and sort of presenting a sort of more clear and standardized citywide TDM program. This is also in alignment with the goals and strategies proposed in the Comprehensive Plan and the Sustainable Transportation Plan of Madison. So some of the benefits of the new programs have been summarized as follows. The aim is to have a more consistent program with uniform requirements across Madison, and the targets would be based on project size and proposed parking capacity. Another advantage would be to offer choice. So our aim is to offer a menu with a range of TDM measures, and this would range from very simple measures such as just providing wayfinding signs to something simple like providing a land use mix. Another advantage is providing clarity. So currently, TDM requirements have been ad hoc. Developers often push back and they can point to other land uses with no such requirements. So our aim is to provide very straightforward requirements and measure options, which would be easily available and accessible through a simple online tool. Another advantage is to acknowledge some of the existing city requirements, such as bicycle parking provisions and pedestrian access that's already required from all projects. So our aim is to sort of acknowledge these and provide credit for what the developers are already achieving. A couple of other advantages are convenience. So the process, streamlining approval process and reducing the need for external assistance, especially, consultant reports that have been required so far. And through this program, we hope that traffic reducing elements of a project would be summarized for the public and policy makers, especially the community and environmental benefits that we've already gone through in a previous slide. So this slide, this map here shows some TDM programs that have been implemented that we have actually referred to while evaluating design considerations for Madison. And these are among some of the many TDM programs that have actually been implemented across the country. Next slide, please. So city staff have considered best practices from around the country to design a fair, consistent, and effective TDM program for Madison. And these are some of the highlights of some of the prominent and successful programs. So as you can see here, and as Tom had also mentioned previously, cities such as Arlington and Cambridge have long-standing and pretty well-established programs that have targeted and actually successfully attained significant reduction in single occupant vehicles, which is basically reducing the number of drive-alone trips. And Arlington's TDM requirements run with the land, while those of Cambridge have been primarily based on the number of proposed parking stalls. San Francisco is another pretty successful example. The program there incorporates both parking and land use triggers, and it also targets VMT or vehicle mile travel reduction. And this is similar to what Madison is actually considering. San Francisco has also developed a user-friendly tool for developers through which they can easily access and find out their TDM requirements. And Soumya will be using that tool to later demonstrate TDM requirements and measures for Madison. Next slide, please. So the suggested TDM program for Madison would potentially work along these 5 broad steps. The first step is determining applicability. So development seeking building permits with residential and or non-residential uses. So it would be both individual as well as mixed uses. And under non-residential, it would include commercial, retail, office, institutional. So these projects would be participating in the program. It would not target all the developments, and there would be some thresholds. So as you can see, the list of exemptions, residential uses that have less than 10 dwelling units would be exempted. Non-residential uses with less than 10,000 square feet gross area would potentially be exempted, including small retail use. This is another exemption. And in case of affordable housing projects, these projects would get special credit via points. So if based on the percentage of affordable housing, they would be getting extra points. The next step would be determining targets. So TDM targets would be determined based on the development size, the use, and the number of proposed parking stalls. And TDM requirements would be received in points. If you'd seen, the attached appendix had a list of tables for different land uses, which sort of lay out the potential point requirements. The next step, once the TDM targets are determined, the next step would be creating and submitting a TDM plan. So we've created a menu of TDM measures which have a list of weighted points based on the potential of reducing VMT and success in other cities, as well as use and relevance in Madison. So the developers or property owners would be required to select measures from the menu, and there are over 30 options to select from. And they would need to meet the assigned point target based on the determined target and submit a TDM plan for approval. The next step would be, of course, implementing the measures, and this would also potentially involve payment of a very basic fee to cover program administration and enforcement. And there would be an option to enroll in a transportation management association for additional assistance with some on-site TDM operations. And finally, looking at reporting and monitoring to ensure effective implementation of the program. So TDM obligations would potentially run with the land, similar to parking requirements. In terms of reporting, all projects would need to submit a very simple and short online report, which would basically just certify that measures are in place, along with the basic annual fee, again, to cover administration and enforcement. Some of the larger projects may possibly need to submit a user survey to demonstrate effective implementation. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned in the third step, it would involve choosing measures from a menu. So there are potentially 5 measure categories. Active transportation, which involves measures related to biking and walking. High occupancy vehicle measures, which also includes those related to transit, as well as others such as carpooling, van pooling, such as Zia had mentioned, the rideshare program. Then there could be measures under information and communication, which are very simple marketing and information provisions to residents and employees. There are also measures under parking management and points for land use and location. So they would be getting points for land use mix and for being, let's say, located next to a daycare center or to a transit service. And other than that, there are some 3 basic measures that all projects would be required to implement, which is basically the existing city requirements of providing bike parking, pedestrian access, and they would need to have an employee coordinator. I'll be handing it over now to Soumya, who will be running you through some hypothetical examples to explain how this would work. Thank you.
Thanks for the quick walkthrough, Charvi. So moving forward to the hypothetical projects, we'll be looking at 4 hypothetical projects, 2 predominantly residential projects and 2 predominantly employment-based office projects. Based on the size of the project, number of stalls, and the land use, we'll assess the TDM point requirements of each project that the developer or project or property owner would need to comply with the TDM program. So first, moving on to the residential projects, this is just a quick overview of how residential projects can understand, or developers working on residential projects could understand how the point requirements would work. So on the left, you can see number of parking stalls, and based on how many parking stalls are assigned to a dwelling unit, points vary. And on the top, you can see the size of the project would matter. So anything, as Charuvi already mentioned, anything under 10 dwelling units is exempted from this program. And we have 5 different categories based on sizes. So also, the ones that you see colored in salmon are the projects that would require to submit a detailed annual or biannual report. We're still working on how the reporting would work, but it's going to be more detailed than the rest of the columns that you see in white. So moving on to the first project. So these are just hypothetical projects for us to understand how, based on where a project is located or what the land use is and how big the project is, what the TDM requirements would look like, and what could be the tentative measures that a developer or a property owner could implement to score those points. So the first project, this is a residential project, and it's hypothetical. The address we chose for the first project is on the 800 block of East Wash. So it's closer to Earthview Yoga. It's served by, I guess, bus numbers 6, 15, and 14. It's on the isthmus, so it's a central location. The residential development has 40% affordable housing, and the number of units is 100, and has one parking stall per dwelling unit. So based on the table for residential projects, this would come under, so for one parking stall per dwelling unit, and for 100 dwelling units, the project would require 20 points to comply with the TDM program. So looking at what the hypothetical TDM measures would be, and as Charuvi already said, based on location, and these projects could get a few automatic points. So as presently, the city already requires all projects to give certain amount of bike parking and also provide pedestrian access. So this is not a new requirement. A project would get these 3 points automatically, which we're calling the base points, if the developer or the property owner designates a coordinator and pays the minimal program fee. Then just based on its location, it's also getting 5 points for walk score. As I already mentioned, it's located on East Wash, so the walk score is for the location is very high. And we're just for calculating the walk score, we're just using walkscore.com, which a lot of apartment rental sites use as well. So I think it scores somewhere around 95, so it gets 5 points. It's also within a quarter mile of all-day transit service, so it's also getting 3 points. So without doing anything, a developer, if one is developing a similar residential project around East Wash, they're getting 11 points out of the 21 points that they require. Then because the residential project has 40% affordable housing, they're scoring 5 points. So all they need to do is have unbundled parking. That is, residents would have to pay for a parking stall, and that brings them to a total of 21 points. So essentially, all the developer would have to do in this case would be unbundled parking or having a pricing strategy for parking. Moving on to the second project. This is again a predominantly residential project with just 8,500 square feet of commercial. It's on Raymond Road, so it's closer to Westtown Mall. And so the location would be slightly on the peripheral, so an outer location. It also has dwelling units of, the number of dwelling units for this is also 100. The proposed parking for this project is 1.5 stall. So based on the TDM requirements table, it would still come under the medium category, but the number of points required to comply with the TDM program would be 25, just because it has more parking stalls per dwelling unit than the first project. So this project is just because based on its location, it's not being served by all-day bus service. So it doesn't get points for that. The walk score also is pretty low, so no points for that. So it's only making a total of 3 points automatically based on its location. So On the right, you can see the list of hypothetical TDM measures that the developer could work on to get the points that they would need. So starting with, they could provide an enhanced bike parking. And we have, and this is something that Charuvi's already mentioned, we have a list of almost over 30 measures, and developers can choose from that list, and there are sub options to a lot of measures. So the number of total points that a residential project can earn is 90, and out of the 90 points, this project only requires 25 points. So moving on, they can also provide on-site pedestrian access. They can provide bike facilities beyond or along building frontage. So right now we just have points for along building frontage. They could either help build the facility or provide the city with funding. So they're getting 2 points for that. Then bike user facility would be a repair station or a maintenance station, which is comparatively easy to provide, and a lot of residential projects already have this. They could also provide funding for traffic calming around the project location. This particular project also has 20% of affordable housing, so they're also getting 2 points for that. And as I mentioned earlier, this project has 8,500 square feet of commercial. While this is being exempted from being looked at in terms of what kind of parking they're providing for that use, they are gaining points for mixed use. So just because there are two different types of uses on the property plan, so they're getting a total of 4 points for that. And then if they unbundle the parking, they get 5 points for that. And then they're just left with earning 3 more points, which can be done easily with a multimodal wayfinding sign, which is just putting up a board saying, this is where you can find the bike facility, or if there's a trail nearby. And then a few marketing campaign. This could be just providing residents with where they can find car share or where they can find bike facilities, etc. So this was a quick summary of how residential projects can work on achieving TDM points. Now we're looking at the two office employment-based projects. This is a similar table, which the one that we earlier looked at was for residential. The one for non-residential uses is based on square footage. So moving on to our first project for office uses, this is on East Main Street, and it's again on the Isthmus, so a central location. The built-up area for this would the hypothetical built-up area for this is 110 square feet, and the proposed parking is 1 stall per 500 square feet. So based on the project details, this would come under the high-medium category, and it would have to achieve a score of 22. So, and again, on the left are the automatic points that this project would get just based on its location. Again, it's within a quarter mile of an all-day bus service. It also gets really high points for walk scores. So it's already getting 11 points, and it only needs to get 11 more points to complete the requirement. So what they could do easily is provide transit passes or a non-taxable subsidy. And these programs already exist within the metro. So that could be, and 4 points is on the lower side. So if they're just, say, providing transit passes for half of their employees, they would get these points. Then the next would be priced parking, or providing parking cash out, or having a parking cash out program for employees. Then if they do that, they're just left with 2 more points. So they could easily do that with a multimodal wayfinding sign or a marketing campaign. Now, they could have also put up a real-time transit display board as it's served by all-day transit. So that would be another easily achievable point. Moving on to the fourth hypothetical project. This is on the 4800 block of South Baltimore Lane. And this also has a 3,000 square feet of cafeteria space. So this is closer to the American Family Insurance Office, so pretty much in the suburbs. Again, the built up area for this is 110,000 square feet. The proposed parking is 1.5 stall per 500 square feet. And based on the project specifications, it again falls in the high medium category, but just because it has a slightly higher parking rate, it has to achieve 28 points. So looking at the tentative TDM measures that they would have to do, they're already getting 6 points based on where they're located and just the base points that anyone could achieve. They only have to earn 22 more points. So from what we've done with these 4 hypothetical projects is, while almost all projects could get points based on similar or same measures, we've sort of changed the measures to show you that there are multiple options. So again, starting with just the few basic bike ped infrastructure improvements. Again, they're getting points for 2 uses in their land use mix, and they could provide car share or company fleet for employees. What they could do is also provide a van pool service or a shuttle bus service to the closest transit centers. You can see we've not included transit passes on this, though this is served by transit. This location is being served by transit all day. That is another measure that they could have done and could have easily earned somewhere between 4 to 8 points. They could also have a parking cash out program for employees. And then again, the simpler multimodal wayfinding signage and marketing campaign options. Again, just to emphasize that something that Charavi's already mentioned, the list of weighted menu of TDM measures that we have are based on best practices, their potential of reducing VMT, as well as based on, they're also context specific to Madison. So, and a detailed list of measures is provided in as the attachments of the meeting. So while we don't have a tool ready for Madison, we do feel that it would, or we hope it would look something like that of San Francisco. So I just want to give you a quick run through of how the San Francisco TDM tool works. Now, the measures and the point requirements could be slightly different because it's more specific to San Francisco. But let's look at a similar project if it were in San Francisco and how the tool would work. So I've just picked a random address in downtown San Francisco. Let's go with the office category, employment-based category, the one that we were just looking at. For hypothetical project 4, all you have to do is just enter the specific use, the occupied floor area, and how many parking spaces are assigned to that specific use. So for now, we'll just go with 100. That's also, I feel it might be a lot for San Francisco. But so once you've put that in, and you can see if I change this number, the point target here changes. So let me just go back and put 100. And they're already getting, you can see they're already getting 2 points out of the 21 required. And that's also based on location. The reason why they're getting these points is because they have an inbuilt measure which compares the parking that developers provide based on the neighborhood parking rate. So just because it's slightly lower than the neighborhood parking rate, they're already getting 2 points. While we don't have this measure on our tentative program, We do have other location-based automatic measures that points that we saw, one being the walk score and the other being all-day transit being within quarter mile of all-day transit facility. So moving on, let's say the developer agrees to giving unbundled parking. So they get 2 points for that. And they have a parking cash out program for employees, so 2 points again for that. Let's say they're doing bike and ped, they're giving some kind of bike and ped facilities. Let's go with option B. They're giving showers and lockers at the office. And then let's say they're also giving a bike share membership, but outside of 1,000 feet from the office. So again, 1 point for that. Moving on, let's say they also have delivery supportive amenities. So they're getting, again, another point for that. And then moving on to the HOV, which is high occupancy vehicle, anything related to transit or shuttle. Let's say they have certain incentives for employees and they're choosing, let's go with option C. And then they just have 3 more points that they have to make. So wayfinding signage, real-time transportation display, and let's just go with option 1. So there, these are just an example of how the tool would look and how we're hoping the process would be easy for developers or property owners. And this is how they can go through the list of menu and just choose based on the land use, the location, the size of the project, and the number of stalls that they've planned. So moving on, if anyone has questions for us or any suggestions for the program.
So does anyone have any questions in regard to the TDM information that has been presented? Alder Lemmer.
Thank you. I think it sounds great. I wanted to raise a little bit of a concern. How would you overcome the possibility of this causing residential projects to be underparked, especially like on the edges of the city where there isn't good transit?
So, does anyone from the staff want to take this, or I should try and answer?
Yeah, I think I can give it a try. That is why the second presentation that we're going to give is on parking. And so Sabrina will talk about it, but they need to go hand in hand. I think the concern isn't maybe so much at the edge, but one might take a look at, let's say, the Madison Yards as an example, right? They price the parking. The state office building prices the parking. Many of the state employees don't want to pay for the parking, so then they park, in the neighborhoods. And so we need to develop a program that kind of works hand in hand, and they complement each other. We'd like to encourage those employees to carpool or vanpool or take transit, but we have to perhaps minimize the localized effects to the neighborhood. So it's a balancing act.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Did you have any other questions, Alder Lemmer?
No, that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay. Alder Rummel.
Thank you. I'm interested in how the scoring, how you evolved, I can see why wayfinding is 1 point, but it seems to me wayfinding should be something you just do. So I don't know why you should get a point for something you should just do. But the range of points was from, at least the ones you showed and I noted, were 1 to 5. And just some of the thinking that goes into how you rank the importance or the hardship of this?
So the points, the way we've defined the points, it's again based on, we reviewed a lot of different TDM programs from a lot of different cities. And while we don't have the information in this presentation, different measures are related to the percentage of VMT reduction each is related with, or so it's either based on best practices or based on research. So that's what sort of is affecting the number of points each measure is associated with. Does that answer your question?
Well, to me, that's a circular answer, but I mean, I know what you're saying, that you've looked at other places and you see stuff, but I'm just getting at, like, you know, why do some things get points that maybe they should just be done, and other things, you know, and I get how some things are harder.
Yeah.
But just, you know, just some certain things, I got stuck on marketing and wayfinding. Like, I guess some of those things seem obvious to me. And the other question is automatic points for a designated coordinator and a pay program fee. So would that presume that every new development of a certain size would have somebody to manage this program, maybe internal or, you know, through some kind of contract?
Maybe I'll try and answer a couple of your questions, Alderano. As far as the points, they're based on best practices, but I think they're still a variable. We're still trying to figure out what is the right system for Madison, and I suspect that there'll be more public input. We had a meeting with developers. Was it 2 nights ago, I believe?
Yeah, Tuesday.
I think if I were to summarize their opinion, I think they were in favor of having a predictable and consistent process. But then they were mentioning how if you're on the outskirts or the periphery, it's maybe more difficult to get points. And so we might have to adjust it so that we don't want to push development to Middleton or Sun Prairie. We want them to stay in Madison because we feel like that's sustainable. But we also want them to try and, you know, meaningfully reduce their VMT. As far as automatic points, we could remove the automatic points. I guess, but if we did that, then we might end up lowering our targets, right? I think there is some value in showing people, developers and people who are investing in Madison, that a lot of what Madison already requires helps get you towards this goal, you know? I think there's perhaps, so we could say, all right, you don't get points for bike parking or you don't get points for wayfinding, but then we might end up lowering our totals. And in reality, when you provide bike parking, you do encourage active transportation and you do reduce vehicle miles traveled. And so I think it's okay for that to be incorporated in a transportation demand management because it's consistent with the kind of the whole package.
I think Matt Tucker maybe has something to add. Matt?
Maybe this will help you, Alder Rummel. The things like the signage aren't required. They may be best practice, but they're not required. So this is where you get points and you get credit for doing this, and you create a forum that would require this, or that one could get points and meet the program goals by including these provisions. And when you think about a project manager, think about a place like Madison Yards. This is a big site. It might have a very robust plan, and they might be doing lots of things. They might be doing lots of things today, B-cycle type things or whatever, but there might be new trends that come in the future. And as they continue, and you know, part of the program is going to, and we're still trying to work out the details on this, but like how you recertify yourself every couple of years or a year or so, where you basically report that you're meeting your TDM goals and things like that. When you have a big site, you might need someone that's organizing it. organizing the program because you have lots and lots of uses that may not necessarily be interconnected to each other from a business standpoint. They're just tenants in a much broader development. And that might be a scenario where you'd be having that person that's sort of running your TDM program for you. That could be the person that's contacting Metro to organize bus pass purchases, B-cycle credits, a litany of things. We don't know. And what we know is we know we don't know everything, and we know that in the future, there'll be more new things that we have to add to the list and add points to it and calibrate that. And so all that is sort of like going to be evolving as this is worked out, as we take this out and shop this around more, and as we learn more as how the program could work, applying it here to our city.
Alder Rummel, does that answer your questions, and do you have any more questions?
Well, it basically does. I mean, I guess we're just learning as we go what we think is going to be best for Madison. I think that's the best answer. But it still strikes me that part of the automatic points is a designated coordinator. And then Mr. Tucker says, well, a larger project like Madison Yards, it would make sense. But what about smaller projects? It wouldn't make sense. Or maybe it does. I don't know. So that was just like the automaticness of something that is a paid position that would be, I know that Madison Yards, as I recall, was willing to do that. But, a smaller project is probably not so willing to do that, I would guess. But maybe.
That's not an automatic, perhaps there's a misunderstanding. That's just a choice that the developer has. So they could, I'm just going to say, let's say over by Festival of Foods or whatever, they can choose to have a TDM coordinator, but they may choose to have other measures that give them the points. Do you know what I mean? So it's a choice. It's not a requirement of all developments.
Well, maybe it's me and I'm being too picky. I just read it as part of the base for automatic points, and maybe the graphics need to be clearer.
Yeah, maybe we misrepresented that in this.
It could be me. So thank you. That's good.
I saw it the way you did, Alder Rummel. Oh, yeah. Okay. So Commissioner Cantrell.
Question about am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. I had a similar question about the designated coordinator, because that's a given. And I thought maybe that's basically an application fee, and the city has the coordinator that, does this for small, 12-unit buildings, because a 12-unit building, and this doesn't affect 10 units and below, but it does affect 10 units and above. It's not practical to have a coordinator. Well, maybe the building owner could do it, but anyway, that was a question. But my other question is many of these measures, which get you a lot of points, are for off-site improvements, pedestrian facilities, and I guess transportation right-of-way and those sorts of things. Would that be adjoining the frontage of the project, or maybe a half a mile away? Or I guess that, can someone answer that question?
Mr. Lynch, is that one for you?
Yeah, I had the same question, I think, in our internal meeting about 2 weeks ago. And so probably, so this program is not fully baked out, but most transportation investments occur within the right-of-way, right? So maybe you might be contributing towards an improvement that's not on the right-of-way in front of your development, but you might be contributing to an improvement that's at least within the right-of-way that leads to your development, something to that effect. And then we also are looking at ways that perhaps another challenge that we're trying to resolve is first in neighborhoods, right? Let's say you're the first neighborhood in an undeveloped area. So you don't have connected access. through bike paths or transit isn't out there yet, but you still have a good development. You know, it's still dense and it's what we want to promote. It's just that you happen to be in an area that doesn't have the humanities. And is there a way for a developer to perhaps contribute a fee? You know what I mean? That would be used to help complete the system.
Okay, so it would also include a fee in lieu of an improvement.
I think we're exploring that, yeah. So
okay.
we don't have it yet, but Tuesday there was interest in having that as an option. I think we've discussed that, particularly for developments on the periphery that might have more difficulty and may have fewer automatic points associated with transit or established bike paths and that.
Or walking scores or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sundquist.
Yeah, just to try to clarify that coordinator and what was intended in the slides, since I was involved in doing the slides. The automatic point, somebody is going to have to sign off and do the reports every year and make sure that whatever points they're responsible for are being done. And that's the intent of the automatic point. So if it's a 12-unit building, that's a very part-time job. That's not a full-time position. That could be the owner or the property manager, whoever takes care of all kinds of stuff like that. And what Tom was referring to, there may be a way that if somebody wants to offload some of their responsibilities to a TMA type operation and you know, work it that way, then there would be an opportunity for that. But that automatic point is just in the way it was intended here, and all of this is subject to change. You know, we could take that out and change all the point requirements, whatever, but it was just an automatic point for showing that somebody's going to be paying the fee every year, doing the report every year, making sure that whatever points are required are being done every year. So if that makes sense.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. So there is some discussion, you know, about the additional costs, of course, that requiring a report can bring. I did really like that online tool from San Francisco. And so I was wondering if you envision kind of like a template report, or even if for smaller projects, could an online tool serve as, you know, kind of the report itself, maybe with a cover letter describing some of the things, or just ways that we could make it both a little more cost effective, but also easier to compare across projects, understanding that there will certainly still be some big projects that require a more intense plan.
Who would like to take that one?
I can.
Go ahead, Shirley.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that that's exactly what we were kind of looking at, especially for the smaller projects. It would be a very simple online format, and we were exploring the possibility of just utilizing the same tool and having some kind of PDF that generates based on the measures that are selected, and just certifying it every year.
Okay.
Of course, some of the larger projects would need to submit slightly more detailed reports.
Mm-hmm.
On what they do.
Okay.
On Tuesday, one of the developers, actually it was Kurt Brink, mentioned that if we collected data with this online tool about, let's say, parking utilization, that data could be useful for developers as they try and get their financing for developments.
Yeah.
I think developers or financiers right now like to see the standard, 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet. And if a developer proposes something different, then the finance company, has a harder time saying, yeah, we'll give you the money.
Mm-hmm.
To create a database that shows that, no, in Madison, you can get by with, 1.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
That would be useful for them as they seek financing. So that was an interesting perspective given by one of the developers on Tuesday.
Yeah, absolutely. As well as, real estate brokers and others, just kind of showing what is actually happening versus the old standards that everyone has come to expect. So thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Heck.
Thank you. This may have been answered, but it's related to what Commissioner Cantrell was asking about with the first in problem. And Tom, you may have mentioned accommodating for the inability to have a good walk score, for instance, if you're on the periphery, perhaps, and there's not a lot of amenities around there. So that's not really related to the right infrastructure. It's the first in problem. So I was just off the top of my head, I thought that maybe for that situation, it could be tied. You could get some points if you're first in-ish for implementing, for taking a step to implement something in the comprehensive plan or something like that, so that there was some compensation for that. Just an idea. It doesn't have to be that, but some way of getting credit for that, even though we don't really want people building in the periphery. But if that's what's in the comprehensive plan, then I think they could get credit.
Yeah, and we haven't discussed that yet, but that was an issue that was raised. And in some ways, we say we don't want them building in the periphery, but they could also be building in Middleton or Sun Prairie, you know what I mean? And that probably just adds to our vehicle miles traveled. They're still traveling on our roads. It's just, so we want to make Madison attractive to invest in, because I believe that's a sustainable option, right? Because we do have this peripheral development problem. And it's interesting to watch the chat box in our meeting on Tuesday, because the peripheral developers were saying it's way too hard to get points. You should, and it's easy if you develop in the center, and the developers that were in the center were chatting, yeah, but it's really expensive to develop in the center. So there's this little back and forth competition. And so we'd like to provide an attractive investment playing field for developers all through Madison and reduce our VMT, I think.
Great, thank you.
And since we can't cram everything onto the isthmus, we want to have some of that further out development going on too. Alder Heck, did you have any other questions? No? Okay. Commissioner Cantrell.
Okay, let me see. Where can I unmute my?
You're on. No, you just muted yourself.
Okay. Another, at least, observation I have is that this may encourage affordable housing without like a city subsidy or a significant city subsidy, because you get points, and in some cases pretty significant points. And so that's just at least an observation I had when the individuals went through the examples that they provided. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Solheim.
Commissioner Cantrell reminded me of the question I meant to ask earlier, which is there a definition for affordable housing in this yet, or is that still being defined?
So there is a table. So this is also, again, we can take suggestions and improve on this. Right now, the way we have is we're counting 10% and then so on for anything above, anything below 60% of annual median income.
Great.
So every 10% gains another point.
Mr. Tucker, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So we did talk to the people in community services, the people that do the affordable housing work on the city side about this. And it's probably no surprise to you folks that affordable housing projects just in their own nature have less vehicle trips. They have less people that have vehicles. There's just less of that. Often that comes up, trying to find the best location that is close to transit. You'll hear that a lot. So we did talk about it at length, and we still have to kind of work out some of the details, but there will be a necessity that the affordability is something that is guaranteed for the points to be captured. So, we'll have to make sure that they're deed restricting the affordability. And the projects of the city funds, we clearly do that, but we don't fund all the projects. So if somebody's going to be doing affordability, we're going to have to get into their and they're going to try to get points for it. We're going to need to assure that it has long-term affordability built into it. And yes, this is very supportive of affordable housing.
Thanks for that question and that clarification. Good points. Anything else, Commissioner Solheim?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I don't see any more hands raised right now. I'd like to get a sense of the general reaction to this, if there's any direction that you want to give to staff on taking this forward. Alder Rummel.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I had my hand raised, sorry. One thing that struck me from the beginning of the presentation, I'm not sure if Sir Ruby one of the slides talked about mitigating the negative impacts of system-wide traffic resulting from major land use changes. And I don't think we've really talked about what that means because, and just on a per development micro level, they're not usually so huge and fundamentally large land use changes, although they might be compared to what's nearby, so neighbors might see it that way. But I guess one thing, having experienced a lot of these discussions, both as a plan commissioner and as an alder with a fair amount of development, is pretty much every neighbor is convinced that that 100 new units, that 250 new units, it's just like the tipping point for vehicle miles traveled, right? No matter what it is, people are just sure that it's just too many more people and we're going to have gridlock. And at some point, even just the language does talk about, the increasing system-wide traffic impacts. But on a development level basis, we're always saying, oh, nothing to worry about, neighbor. So what's the trade-off? Because we grow it over time, then it does get maybe more of an impact. And then an area suddenly is like, more congested. And so when we message this to neighbors, how do we think like they do when they see every new person as two cars? Basically they do. They the household has going to have two cars. And I may be exaggerating because there's plenty of people who just say, I don't have a car, I don't need a car, we only need one car. But on the ones that worry, they worry about that there's either not enough not enough parking, or there's just so much that it's just going to overrun everything. And I think as the cultural shift that this is requiring takes some mental discussion about how to make that seem less, to give data and then, how it maybe doesn't always work out to the worst case scenario. And I'm maybe going on, but I think you get the point is how, it's not all about new investment, it's about quality of life. So how do we manage those and balance that? Thank you.
Mr. Lynch, I think this might be yours.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to talk first pre-COVID, right? And then post-COVID, right? Greg Freese, when he talks about a stormwater ordinance, right? He always says that it's not one big project, right? It's not one big pond. It's just you do this for years and years, and pretty soon you get to make a difference. And I think Arlington, Virginia is a good example of that. They've been doing this for 30 years, I believe, and they've reduced VMT, 36%. We can, discourage investment in Madison, but then, we have a demand for people coming into the area. And so they'll come into the Madison metro area. I think we believe it's more sustainable, if they locate near transit where it's easy for them to use non-motorized vehicles. So we just have to try and deal with that, or maybe educate with that paradigm. I think parking management is a big deal. It's a big deal that Sabrina will talk about, and I think we are beginning that journey on how to manage parking. But I'm going to just say the new investment, which is every new investment is kind of the tipping point, right? Like you said, but if we look at Cap East, right? I think most people would say Cap East is a nicer place now than it was 10 years ago. You can go to Festival Foods, there's places to go, it's more walkable. Because of that, we're lowering the speed limit to make it 25 instead of 35, and you could point to almost any of those developments and say that was the tipping point, right? Or maybe that's just part of us growing as a community, and learning to access land uses by walking and using transit. And I'm going to say that this is in concert with the fact that the city is also investing in BRT. It's like a big push. It's like a huge investment that will make transit very much more accessible. And then we can encourage investment along there, and then we can encourage development not to rely on the auto for access to their developments. I guess that's the best I can say.
Thank you. Did you have anything more, Alder Rummel?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Spencer. Commissioner Spencer? Can't hear you. I unmuted you. You look like you're unmuted. Can't hear you.
Get a prompt to unmute.
Oh, there, that's better.
Oh, okay. I just had one comment, and maybe it's something for the peripheral developments to think about, but thinking about sort of safety specific measures, because I know, and I can't quantify this, don't have studies, but the areas like Raymond Road and the outer areas have sort of faster traffic. They're coming in, from other areas. And I know that this is a discussion that we can have further on, but having meaningful design for pedestrian and bike facilities that are, inclusive to people who, aren't always going to walk, and making sure that if transit does make it out to those areas, that, transit stops and residential centers and community centers are all connected. But I just wonder if there's opportunities for those type of developments on the periphery and the more suburban areas to do safety measures, signs, paint, not just wayfaring, but like signs and comprehensive winter maintenance and that sort of thing. Thanks.
Thanks for that input, Commissioner. Commissioner Cantrell?
In thinking about Alder Rummel's question, I guess we review projects on a case-by-case individual basis, one at a time, but it's the cumulative effect of these projects that impact areas and neighborhoods. And in looking at East Washington now compared to 10 years ago, it's totally being transformed. And obviously, new residents provide additional traffic and those sorts of impacts. But this, the TDM is exactly what we're trying to do to affect and to minimize those impacts. So, this is very important. I think we should be moving forward on this proposal, because I think that to get at your issue and your and the neighborhood's concerns, this and the parking adjustments that we're going to be looking at next, I think gets exactly at that. And so I'm very supportive of this. So I think that obviously we need to flush it out more, but I think this is something that provides clarity in the TDM that we don't have right now. I mean, we review these on a case by case. Well, maybe we should require this or maybe that, but this provides some clarity and some details on what developers can expect. So I think that it's very important, and I think that we should again move forward on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Rummel.
Thank you. Just the conversation about the Capital East, of course, makes me think, because it's been a long time, and you're right. Whoever said 10 years ago we wouldn't have imagined all this, because 10 years ago we didn't know how we were going to get beyond the highway retail and have anything. So it's kind of amazing, really. But one thing that I wanted to remind ourselves is that when the city was working with the land use process or the land banking process, and Otto Gephardt was doing the commercial on both sides, and he got to the south side, my side of it, and we convinced him to build an office building without any parking. And really, how many office buildings get built that way? I mean, we had to build a parking ramp, but it made more sense to socialize the cost of the parking ramp than to add to the cost of to a building where however many floors are above and below ground are devoted to storing cars, which always is the thing about me that it sort of strikes me about the modern housing. It's like we spend as much storing cars as my grandparents spent on their first house. So, I mean, it's just kind of like crazy making. But one last thing before we move on, or before I give up on this topic, is that one thing all of these things don't ever mention is free bus fares. Why isn't that on the table? Thank you.
When we say transit subsidy, that could be it. So it's a code word for either free bus fares or reduced bus fares.
So don't talk in code to everyone. We don't know what you're talking to yourselves then. Thanks.
Yeah. One thing though that is a problem of the transit subsidy is that developers oftentimes like to be able to get in and out, right? And a transit subsidy is a multi-year commitment. So we have to figure out a tool on how a developer could provide a transit subsidy that goes beyond the time that they're involved with that project. And maybe that's a new product that Metro offers or something. I don't know.
Thank you.
What I'm getting at is maybe the public taxpayer subsidizes our bus fare and our bus costs, and you don't have to pay money to get on. So there's no incentive for a private developer to do anything other than I maybe don't have to build as much parking because the bus is free.
Yeah. And there is a study going on with that right now. So
thank you, Alder. Commissioner Sundquist.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to keep my embed with staff hat on for just a moment and recognize Sharuvi, who is calling in from Delhi, and where it's like 6 a.m. So big props to her. And Soumya, who's calling in from Minneapolis, where it's cold. So both of them have done lots of great work on this. And so hopefully everybody saw that and appreciated that. Let me put on my policymaker hat and just say that I'm hearing lots of concerns about what's going to happen in the so-called periphery. And the slide showed like sort of a worst case scenario on Raymond Road. We can work through more of that. But as a policymaker, I think we really want good location. And we don't want, 200 units of housing stuck far away from everything else. Our plans all call for that. I mean, this is consistent with what we want in the comp plan, what we want. We don't want to keep getting stuck with affordable housing that is far away from everything, where everybody like saves on their rent, but now has to drive, and so they end up poorer than before. So there are going to be ways that people can develop in the places that plans call for, where there are going to be mixtures of uses and good land, good transportation options. And there will be ways to reflect that in the points, I'm certain. And I think we'll probably, now put my other hat on, we'll probably need to like suss that out and show it so people believe it. That it's not just a heavy, hobnail boot on everybody who wants to build outside of the isthmus. That's not the intent. There needs to be some room, but still there's good places and bad places outside of the isthmus that people should be aiming at. So that's my policymaker hat there. I think there's ways to deal with it, and not just simply say, "No, we'll let it go because it's out in the periphery."
Thank you, Commissioner, for speaking from both your hats. Appreciate that. My sense is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that commissioners support the direction that this is taking and the work that's been done, recognizing that there are still some things that need to be refined or developed a bit more, and recognizing that this does need to connect with our parking policy. Is that an accurate representation of where people are? And if it's not, okay, I see some thumbs up. If it's not, okay. If it's not, raise your hand and stay whatever your position is. Okay, seeing no raised hands, Alder Rummel.
I just want to say this is all really new, so I'm not really just saying, "Oh, go." I'm just learning, and before I hear about the parking and see it as a whole totality, I can't really say that I'm yes or no. I think there's elements that are really interesting, and I'm intrigued. Thank you.
It's not a yes, we're done, this is approved, but it's that the direction that's being taken, the concepts, that we want to move forward in that direction. So I hear where you're coming from, and I don't see it as this is a final approval kind of thing. So thank you for clarifying that, Alder. The next item on the agenda is on-street parking policies. And Sabrina Tolley will be taking us through some of that information. Ms. Tolley.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'll share my screen here with you. I've got a short PowerPoint presentation. And really we'll just be going kind of an overview of the current program, some of the limitations and challenges that we commonly hear with the current status of the program, and discuss kind of one proposed option for a creation of a third program, and get feedback on that, and any other feedback just in general you may have on this program and management of residential areas. Okay. So for just a quick overview, we have an RP3 and an RPO program currently. When we talk about RP3, we're typically referring to the residential parking permit program that is restricted by 1 hour or 2 hour parking. So residents who are eligible for a permit can park in excess of those time limit restrictions, typically up to 48 hours, barring any other posted restrictions for alternate site parking and other restrictions. And then the existing RPO program is resident parking only. However, our current ordinance has that where only 50% of the block can be designated with resident permit parking only. And then the other 50% of that block is left completely unrestricted. That would allow anyone to park on those, including commuters. So in terms of the purpose defined by our ordinance is to provide a mechanism for residents for limited storage of vehicles to the partial exclusion of commuter vehicles. Again, to the purpose currently is to reduce automobile commuting, waste air pollution, and VMT to the area, also reducing traffic congestion and illegal parking. In terms of the definition of a commuter, it does mean any non-resident. So it isn't necessarily just your typical idea of a all-day daytime commuter. In our ordinance, it's defined as anyone who does not live in that area. So currently we've got 25 residential parking permit areas. Residents can purchase a permit for their area only, and it does allow them to park anywhere within that area. Again, talked a little bit about the 1 and 2 hour time limit restrictions. Typically, they are posted either Monday through Friday or Monday through Saturday, and that's typically at the option of the residents who are requesting those restrictions be installed. They're in place from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. That is for both the RP3 and the what I will call 50% RPO. One of the challenges with the time limit restrictions is that essentially with a 2-hour time limit, enforceability is really only 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And in reality, it's prior to 4 p.m. Since enforcement officers have to chalk and then return at least 2 hours later. So if they're marking a vehicle at 4 p.m., by the time they're able to enforce it, that person would already be legal. So it's really a pretty limited time frame that those restrictions are enforced. So the first program that was created by the city was the RP3. That's the standard 2-hour or 1-hour parking permit restrictions that you see. And then that number in the lower left-hand corner is indicating the area, and that's the permit number that person has to be displaying to legally park in those spaces beyond that time limit. In 2000, the 50% RPO program was created. And the intent or reason why that permit was created was to provide a little bit of a balance or compromise for residents who wanted to accommodate some commuter parking. So West High School was specifically cited in some of the historical documents on the purpose for that, where there is a desire to be able to restrict some of the parking to make that available for residents, while still not prohibiting all commuter parking in those areas. In terms of how those are currently added, for eligibility for restrictions to be added, it does need to be at least 50% residential. So these restrictions cannot be installed in purely commercial areas. Currently, we use a petition process for residents to apply for this. It's a majority support of residents on the block must want to install the restrictions, and then a study is done for commuter impact to determine whether, in fact, that neighborhood is occupied by commuters a majority of the time. Recently, there was also a public hearing process in lieu of that petition process. And that's really to address some of the areas that may have either high density housing and a number of residents where it would be difficult to obtain a majority of signatures, or where perhaps a majority of the residents may be ineligible either because of a conditional use restriction or an ordinance change that was implemented several years ago, which prohibits any new developments with more than 4 units from being eligible to obtain permits. So in terms of some of the challenges with new development that I know I've frequently heard is, one, the folks feel that enforcement levels aren't robust enough. and that there's still quite a bit of commuter parking with people moving vehicles every couple of hours or risking the parking citation because they feel that it's worth the risk if they only get a couple of tickets versus having to pay for parking. And the other thing is with in new developments where residents are not eligible to purchase a permit, there still is impact to existing residents in that while they are not able to purchase a permit, they're really only restricted from parking on the street between 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., but are able to still take up those on-street parking spaces for overnight parking. And for reverse commuters, folks who may have an off-street parking place available, but they have to pay for it, may choose to drive their vehicle to work during the day. And when they return home, they're able to park on street, and increasing competition among residents who do not have an off-street option. So in terms of a potential third option, some information was provided on a mapped area as well as some potential criteria for designating 100% RPO areas. So those would be, rather than the 50% of the block being unrestricted and 50% requiring a permit, that would be 100% restricted. So only residents with a parking permit would be able to park from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Some of the benefits, one, are for enforcement. Compliance would be extremely high. It also expands the hours that those spaces can actually be enforced. Since enforcement officers would not have to return and wait 2 hours to enforce, they could enforce beginning right at 8 a.m. Through 6 p.m. So it would really reduce the impact or ability for ineligible residents to take advantage of those spaces for a good portion of the day and reduce the impact on residents who are relying on those. Also, in general, would be a way without increasing costs of enforcement to increase their ability to enforce throughout the city with greater efficiency and to cover these areas more regularly and cite violators. Other changes, I guess, or potential changes for input and feedback is the current practice has been for residents to petition on a block by block basis, or now by resident or alder request to designate through a public hearing process. There, I think, is some interest in the city taking a more proactive approach to apply restrictions more broadly, rather than leaving it to residents to determine block by block. And historically, the reason for that has been because the intent is for residents to support the full program costs through the purchase of the permits and willingness to pay those permit fees. So, really the intent has been not to impose those restrictions on residents who may not feel that they have a need or want to pay for a permit, and having traditionally had that be resident driven. Again, went over some of the pros and cons with enforcement. Doing an RPO would be significantly advantageous over a time limit restriction. The downsides with that, and you'll as you'll see in the criteria that we've provided, or some draft criteria, is that the areas would have to be primarily residential, not in areas where there might be a lot of mixed use or competing needs for visitor parking. So areas that have restaurant and retail, that some short-term parking is desirable to accommodate to support the businesses in the community, would likely not be considered for 100% RPO, since that would still provide some access for those traveling by personal vehicle to access those locations. I guess another advantage potentially of an RPO program is that under the existing state statute, you can have a guest permit program or allow guest permit passes with restrictions designated as resident permit parking only, but not on those that are designated with time limit restrictions. On the other hand, one of the benefits, again, with not having RPO is that it does allow some short-term visitor parking and access for guests. So some of the questions, just to get some feedback on, is thoughts on 100% RPO, some of the draft criteria on that, and the designation process that we're currently using, and whether that should just be applied broadly to all residential areas, streets in those defined areas that are commuter impacted. And with that, happy to take any questions.
Are there questions of Sabrina? I don't see raised hands. I'm sure we will get some. So until we have a raised hand, I've got one question. How much exploration have you done of priority ranking system since we have limited numbers of spaces and we're providing these permits for people then who can't find spots because they're oversold by an extra 75% or 1.5 times what's available?
Sure. Let me see if I'm understanding the question.
Like Toronto does.
So basically establishing, so limiting the number of parking permits to an area with priority given to residents that are most in need. Is that
right? I mean, if you've got the option of off-street parking because you've got a single-family home with a driveway and a garage, or you've got, it's a multi-family and there's plenty of parking in it, but people would prefer not to pay for it, for example. And so making those at a lower priority than somebody who has no option.
Sure, we've not investigated that model.
I'm sorry, no.
Oh, we have not investigated that model.
Okay. Okay, we do have some hands raised now. Alder Rummel.
Thank you. First of all, this is one of those perennial things. So thank you I'm glad everyone's putting their collective minds on it. And maybe, Sabrina, could you put up the list of the different districts again? Just Sure. So we can all visualize it. And I know when the chair was an alder, we spent a lot of time sort of chit-chatting among ourselves, like it's the RP3 program is driven by commuters. It's not driven by, oh, I'm in the new multi-family apartment building and I don't want to pay for parking, so I'm going to park on the street. And I know that staff was looking at different ways of evaluating that, and maybe that's that subcommittee or that staff committee. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit. And then secondarily, just as an aside, I really have the one that's 19, which is in my district. I'm pretty sure most people would love to have that turn into an RPO of some type, because I just hear so many complaints that we're relying on enforcement so that people don't just jam up the streets when they're not authorized to. And that just doesn't seem really to serve the people that feel like they're, especially at the very western end, they're impacted by these little streets and too many cars. So anyway, I mean, of course I haven't taken a pulse, but just basing it on like the years of questions about the signage and what does it mean and what, all the problems. I'm sure people would be interested in learning more about that option. But anyway, thanks. Back to my commuter versus other impacted question.
Yeah, so we have done some research and discussions. We've sent over some kind of draft criteria ideas to the attorney's office. And I'm sorry I didn't touch on this in my presentation, but one of the challenges, I guess, with this that we've been finding in the legal opinions is with regard to how you differentiate between who is and is not eligible for a permit. So previously we used to define specific buildings through the conditional use process and would designate those places as ineligible for residents to obtain permits. That was essentially codified in ordinance, in the RP3 ordinance. And so with that, there has to be, for those programs, if you're differentiating between who is eligible and is not, there has to be a defined sort of legally defensible purpose for doing so. The attorney's office, I guess, uses a commuter proxy theory. So the reason we're allowed to prohibit residents of new, larger buildings from obtaining a permit by ordinance in the RP3 program is under the commuter proxy theory, which is that if those residents were allowed to purchase a permit, that they would park their vehicle on the street rather than using their available off-street parking, and would then rent their spaces to commuters. So in terms of when we've looked at ways how we might extend the hours later in the evening, certainly the attorney's office has said, yes, we can do it if we have a defined purpose or if it fits within the existing ordinance. However, it would be difficult to make an argument for differentiating between certain residents and others in allowing them to purchase permits. So one of the things we've discussed is, if we were to add, and I think it's certainly worth, having additional research on. It's been somewhat, I would say, preliminary research, but the initial response in terms of if we were to add something to the purpose of, increasing density and reducing the impact on existing, residents of new developments in opposition. So, which really is, again, the purpose we're, I think, trying to achieve with allowing existing residents to purchase permits, but not those of larger new developments. But there is a legal issue there that we've not found, I guess, a purpose that the attorney's office has felt would allow us to do that.
Did you have any follow-ups to that, Alder Rummel?
Maybe later.
Okay, thank you. Alder Heck.
Thank you. Sorry, I get confused when we talk about the details of this, and I think you were just talking about who's eligible for a permit and who isn't, and the intricacies of that. And I understand that that's one issue. And then there's you mentioned earlier that about commuters, it being a commuter-driven permit program, and yet there are places that it's not commuter traffic where it's obviously still in effect, yet you can't ask to have impacts of a nearby business mitigated by having RP3 parking. So I'm still a little bit confused about when it can be used and when it can't. RP3 or RPO. I guess RPO is the same justification. So that's one question. Just a couple of other smaller questions. The RPO at 100% is interesting to me, but I'm wondering if there could actually be something in between to a 50, a 75, and 100. Maybe that's too complicated, I don't know. And then also about guest passes. When you've discussed guest passes, have you envisioned there being a fee to have, you know, to buy a sheet of 20 guest stickers or something like that? That seems like a reasonable idea.
So, Ms. Tully, I think the first question is trying to clarify what the RPO and RP3 programs are aimed at.
Sure. So currently in terms of a street being eligible, the block has to be at least 50% residential to be eligible. So that particular program, you know, we wouldn't be able to do it on locations that are 100%, you know, commercial office. But it does allow for mixed use areas as long as there's at least 50% residential for those restrictions. And that's in ordinance. You know, that's what our designation is that it's at least 50% residential for the designation criteria. But other than that, if the majority of on-street parking spaces are impacted by non-residents, it would be eligible.
And that has to be 100% of the time, or can it be, you know, 50% of the time that it's over 50% impacted by commuters, or how is that really implemented?
Sure. So it's so the definition in ordinance just says it needs to be impacted by commuter a majority of the time, which we assume means a typical day would be impacted, or at least 50% of the time that there are commuter impacts during the time frame studied.
Did that answer your first question, Alder Heck, or could you, if not, let's try to nail this down, because I think it's pretty important. So
yeah, your last phrase was during the time studied. So many of the problems also in my area are actually at night, but those would be residents parking, so they probably wouldn't qualify. They're not people who in some areas it's from businesses, and so there's some potential there. But a lot of it is just people who don't want to pay to park in their paid parking structures, and that's where the RPO might have a little bit of impact, I suppose. But there's still no mechanism for 24-hour resident only or nighttime resident only parking. That would require a whole new program, and I understand that's somewhat restricted by state law. Is that right?
So it's actually there are some statutory requirements if you're going to be restricting for 24 hours or during certain overnight hours in terms of a majority vote of the council, and I think a couple other requirements. But I think the larger issue with that is the equal protection clause. There was a Supreme Court case, I believe it was actually Arlington County, Virginia, in I think 77 was the court case that was challenged, and the Supreme Court basically defined that you can differentiate to give sort of on-street parking privileges to some people and not others, meaning to residents versus non-residents, provided that there is a rational relationship between designating that and the stated purpose. And went on to say that the commuter parking impacted program, restrictions did allow for residents to receive that privilege over non-residents because of the purpose of that. But it comes down to, I guess, having a legal argument for differentiating between two different types of residents, and that and there may be a way to do it. We've been discussing some of other ideas with the purpose in terms of development and density, but have not, I think the initial response was that it likely is problematic to create a program that would allow some residents and not others by ordinance or by program to be eligible or not.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I think I'll explore that offline a little bit more so we don't take up too much time. But then I just had my two small questions about RPO perhaps having a couple different gradations of percentage use, and then did you consider the possibility of charging for guest passes?
Yeah, so in terms of different percentages, I think that's certainly something we could consider if we wanted to have some 25% left unrestricted, or even time limit restricted RP3. I think that certainly could be an option as well. I don't think there's anything that would prohibit us from having half the street RPO and half RP3. So I think there are other variations that could be considered. And in terms of the guest permit parking program, we have not, I don't think the option has ever really been explored that closely, mostly because we've always had RP3, which isn't allowable to have a guest permit program. And I think we just have a handful of blocks that have selected to do the 50% RPO, presumably because they don't feel that it provides adequate parking or restrictions against the commuter impacts. So most people have chosen to go with the time limit restricted for the full block. But yeah, I think we would want to charge a fee. I think there is certainly potential for abuse or increased parking pressures with a guest permit program that we would need to be careful with if we're allowing folks, some number of guest permit passes. We definitely want to limit that so they aren't either sold, for $5 to commuters who would have to pay $20. That would be a great deal for them. So I think would want to charge a fee and also carefully craft such a program to prevent abuse.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Oliver. Mr. Lynch, did you have something that you would like to add? I saw that your hand was up.
Yeah, mine is more of, I'm taking a step back we're getting into the details of the ordinance, and I want to just say I'm a fellow sojourner. I live in District 6, and I've had 4 teenagers in my house, and lots of them like to drive, right? And I've got a narrow street that has on-street parking, and I'm sure that my neighbors hated me for many years as I was raising my kids because I would have more than 2 cars. You know what I mean? And so if you take just a step back, and I'm taking the step back because I'm a traveler with all of you guys. Do I have a right to that space, that's on the other side of my house? And if I have a right to that space, then, do I pay taxes on it, or is that really a public space that lots of people in the community have right to it? And maybe I have to tell my daughter, you're walking to East High, you don't get the van tonight. And so I think we have to kind of develop a program that encourages the behaviors that we want. And while as much as I'd like to say, I'd like it to protect my parking spots in front of my place, you know what I mean? Although it's not without, my teenagers are out, so it's not as big a problem now, but we have to, and then probably the second thing, and there have been a lot of good comments, and I think we need to do a lot more exploring. I think particularly that need-based, it's just an interesting concept, that need-based. But Yang Tao has an interesting saying. He says sometimes cities are messy, and I think that I'm not sure that we can point to any major city and say they have their parking problem figured out, because there's always going to be kind of competition for that resource. And so what we want to do is we want to develop a program that, perhaps minimizes the impact, but doesn't necessarily protect my parking space in front of my place, but maybe encourages the behaviors that we want to encourage. Maybe when I was raising my daughters, we should have had one less car, and I'm speaking as a compatriot, not as a policy wonk. So.
Thank you very much for those comments. Alder Foster.
Thank you, and thank you, Tom. I was feeling really anxious with this conversation, and I appreciate a lot of what you just said. As someone who's been focused on transportation policy for a long time, it's all really messy, it's all really complicated, it's all interrelated. But I feel like I have some sort of clarity, and maybe I'm wrong, but I've got some sort of clarity around what our big picture plans are for transit development, what our big picture plans are for improving our bike network, what our big picture plans are for improving pedestrian access. And to be completely honest, I just truly do not understand what our strategy is and what our goals are related to parking. But clearly, parking is so critical within that transportation system and also related to land use and related to TDM. But I feel like having a very detailed conversation about, well, should we maybe go to RPO instead of RP3? My anxiety is because I don't have anything to hold on to. I don't even know where we're trying to go to. And so trying to answer these questions to me is really, really difficult without that higher level strategy. And I know that's something we've kind of brought up at TPPB, and we just kind of haven't gotten to it and haven't been able to start to develop that higher level framework. But I really think we have to force ourselves to do that, because I feel like we're going to be, I don't agree with the purposes that are in the ordinance today. When I look at those and when I read those, and then we're talking about, well, how do we kind of get around those or modify those, and the things that you brought up, Tom, around what are people entitled to, right? And my concerns are, well, just like we don't want people to take advantage of cheap or subsidized on-street parking to avoid having to pay for a parking spot in a new building, why does a homeowner that has a driveway and a garage, but they like to fill their garage with a boat and not park their cars in their driveway because it's inconvenient for them, why should they have right to free or heavily subsidized parking, you know, just on the residential side. And, you know, and maybe we kind of got away with it up till now, but like think 10 years from now, 20 years from now. I mean, what kind of inequity between, well, you're an apartment liver, and so you don't have access to park on the street, but the guy across the street who's fortunate enough to own his house, you know, he gets to. I mean, using this as a tool to help TDM get in the door, it just, I get why we're talking about it in this framework, but it makes me really, really uncomfortable. And also, like, we haven't really talked about broader equity questions. And, you know, with our overall transit network redesign work that we're embarked on right now, the consultant has already been very clear with us. This is going to come down to a question of how much do we want to focus on moving people around, and how much do we want to focus on questions of equity and access for people that live somewhere far out that's not very efficiently served by transit. Are we gonna pay and use some of our transit capacity to get out to low-income neighborhoods that aren't easily served by transit? And we're gonna have those choices in front of us. And the reality is, a lot of these low-income housing projects that we're allowing to get built out in the far end of Milwaukee or out on the far north side or the far west side, those are people that are going to have to drive. I mean, we don't have good alternatives for them. Biking in from those great distances is not practical. It's not realistic. And so should they not have access to be able to drive in to a place where they can then get on the bus? Should they not be able to park their car on a street, or, you know, buy a parking permit to be able to do that? And yet the people that live downtown or very nearby, who have the best transit access, the most bikeable, most walkable neighborhoods, they're going to have a subsidy and a better chance to be able to store cars and own 2 or 3 cars. So, like, I just feel like we really have to get into those deeper questions and establish a broader parking policy before we can tackle this question of like RPO or RP3, because it just, I don't know how to hold on to this conversation and make sure that the goals of the program match our bigger transportation strategies. So I guess that's not really a question, but I'm just putting it out there because this whole time I've just been feeling like, yeah, we got to answer these questions, but I think we got to take a step back, like Tom just said, and really answer some of the bigger questions first, and then we can get into more of the details about what should the programs look like.
Thank you, Alder. One thing I would just like to emphasize that Alder Foster brought up is the value of our on-street parking and the value of that curbside for maybe other things too. So I appreciate the concern about those larger issues. And again, to make TDM successful in terms of vehicle miles traveled and all that, we can't just be pushing the folks onto the streets that can't then park in whatever the development is, because that defeats the purpose of the TDM then too. So a lot of complicated things coming up. So thank you for all the things that people are bringing up. Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, I really appreciate Alder Foster's and Mr. Lynch's discussion on this. It is a real kind of a messy issue, but I live in Area 5 on West Main Street, so it's a lot of multiple family, lots of apartments and houses that have been converted to 2 to 4 unit buildings. A lot of on-street parking. A lot of the buildings have off-street parking, but I'm assuming that, again, that people don't want to pay for the parking, so they park on the street. I'm also assuming, I don't know this for sure, but there's probably some commuter parking from the university or from the downtown, but it's probably not a lot. We're impacted most by football games, hockey games, the farmers market on Saturday, those sorts of issues, which would kind of be beyond these time periods. But I looked at all these charts and all these other cities, but one of the things that Grand Rapids has done, they have a lot of commuter lots. And I guess in order to get at the impacts of only having resident parking on the RO solution to have residential parking permits on the street, it appears to me that the commuters would have to have some options, and either they would have commuter lots, which they could be bused in, or they would have to pay for parking ramps or parking somewhere, or provide, get lease parking from buildings or parking lots, which may be illegal, but they would do. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out, what would be the impact on some of these areas? It would potentially free up on-street parking for residents, which would be good. But then it would be a cost to some of the residents who live there, which may be more lower income. So that's a kind of adverse impact. But in order to get at how to eliminate the commuter parking, you're going to have to provide it somewhere. And I'm assuming from people driving in from Sun Prairie or other areas that we don't have a regional transit system yet. So how are we going to address that without having commuter parking lots, which, Ken Golden, when I was on the MPO, talked about commuter parking lots that we would have a great bus service that would shuttle people into the inner city when either for employment or those sorts of things. So, but I guess I'm somewhat supportive of the RO, but I guess I'm trying to figure out what the impacts would be if we applied it and all over.
Sure. Mr. Lynch or Sabrina, did you?
Yeah, I did just want to respond to the RO in terms of applying it everywhere. And I don't think that would be our intent. And again, I think Alder Foster raised some good points that, is this still the purpose we want to pursue? This is, in terms of what's proposed here, is addressing the issues and problems that are most frequently heard, prioritizing residents essentially over all other uses. And that's what this program has historically done, is to and it is effective at reducing the amount of commuter traffic, or at least pushing it out, so there isn't maybe people drive 5 miles in instead of 10 miles in, right? And they're driving in part way and hopping on the bus in outlying areas. But in terms of where it might be applied, I think that's where we're looking at locations that would have, a couple of the criteria might be more permits issued than spaces available. So density, high demand, and need for on-street parking for it to be eligible. We have a couple areas, for instance, that RP3 has been designated by the request of residents, and not a single permit has been purchased for those locations because there isn't actually a need. It's been implemented out of desire to not have commuters in a neighborhood. So I will, there are some of those issues as well. And part of that is the ordinance currently provides an exemption for eligibility, which typically you do need to have fewer off-street parking spaces than dwelling units on a block for it to be eligible. However, there's an exemption for single-family homes. Those aren't taken into consideration. So if they have a garage and driveway and aren't actually relying on on-street parking, that would not prevent those locations from being included in the commuter impacted program if they have commuter impacts. So I think that's a good question. And I know Tom Lynch has raised questions about, should we use streets for designated park and ride locations where there isn't a high demand for parking, but we don't want folks, using it for, to avoid paying for parking at their work. But maybe, is there a way we can try to designate those for on-street? And I think Tom wanted to add something.
Yeah, I do. I'm going to take the step back, right? You can tell I'm not into the details, but I think one of our most cost-effective park and ride lots are the streets off Jennifer Street, right? And and it's also the Olin Park, Olin Turville parking street, right? And then also, park and rides and parking facilities are hugely expensive. They're $25 million. And as we look at what we're building with BRT and everything, and the parking general reserve fund right now, there's just not that kind of money there. And yet we have this resource, our streets, right? That are our streets, and they could be, actually, I guarantee you at least 2,000, I bet you at least 2,000 people use our streets throughout the city and then get on transit, okay? And so is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Our streets are an existing resource, right? And it doesn't cost us $25 million to build them. They do cause parking impacts. It's a parking impact, but it's kind of an organic thing, right? And Parks is always coming to me and says, "Your commuters are filling up our lots." And I'm saying, we're one big community, right? And you have a resource that's not being used. So I think financially, we're going to invest about $160 million in the BRT system. And right now, our parking, general reserve is just really impacted by this COVID, and then we have other needs. And so the ability to build structured parking is going to be really challenging, but we do have a resource that people are using. Can we use that? Is it okay if they use that resource? And then how do we manage that resource so that it doesn't create too many impacts to those who live in the neighborhood?
Thank you. Alder Heck.
Thank you. Just a couple of things I wanted to say. I think Alder Foster's points about and Tom Lynch's points were excellent ones about about who owns the street and such, and I really appreciate that. This this discussion to me is really fascinating, and I wish we had more time to talk in depth about this. And I hope that discussion will continue as it not even necessarily related to our topics tonight, but there's obviously a lot to be said and talked about. And I do think I originally raised my hand because I wanted to challenge Alder Foster's narrative about people with RP3 permits having boats and things. And I really do think that there are thousands of RP3 permit holders who are lower income folks who either live in old multi-flats or tiny houses with no driveways. And that still doesn't mean they own the street. So I appreciate that. But I think we have big conversations to have, and I wish we had a few more hours to spend on this topic. That's all. Thanks.
Well, that is one reason why I said at the beginning, I think we need a bit more staff work perhaps on some of this to come up with some ideas or options, kind of like we got for the TDM. So we're looking at probably scheduling something in early January, another meeting like this, and I'm looking at Heather to make sure that she doesn't go crazy on that and that sounds right. Okay.
And just one more thing, and the people on Transportation Commission or TPPB, they I'm sure have been discussing this stuff a lot more than we have. So it'd be great to get caught up with some of that, or at least we visit them, and since they're the experts.
Yes.
Thanks.
And yes, and we do want to get something that would help the TDM program do what we're aiming for it to do, rather than simply pushing the folks who otherwise would be parking in the developments parking area from just simply parking them into the streets, because then we have the same vehicle miles traveled, and we don't want that to happen. So yeah, there's a lot of things to think about. Alder Rummel.
Thank you. I have a bunch of just random comments. First of all, you know, as far as like the sense of entitlement, I hear that, but also we have a built environment that we sort of landed in. You know, we didn't make it, you know, move into houses that weren't built with cars in mind, or streets that were built with cars in mind. And now we have a whole system that's reliant on this single occupancy thing. And yes, as policymakers, we're trying to get beyond it, but I just, you know, it just seems like, yeah, people feel that they should be able to use the streets. I think we all feel like we own the streets in front of us and everywhere. So I just don't want us to forget that it is a public amenity and lots of demands on it, but even including the people who live right there. One thing that really strikes me from the very beginning of this meeting, and I thought it was a really good presentation, Sia, that, you know, what is COVID how's it gonna change the way people go to work, or what's a commuter become, you know? What changes should we, I mean, is it too soon to start making predictions? Probably, but, you know, I work at the Department of Revenue, and there's a gigantic parking lot there. And a couple of years ago, I started hearing things, well, we're gonna build a new parking structure. And I remember thinking, what? They can rent, if they need to, for seasonal employees across the street at the Alliance Center. And there was always a cluster of people who parked over there. But now they just announced, the secretary just said, we're not gonna build a parking structure. Like, yay, we don't need that. And now it just seems like, how else are other kind of jobs changing? And what's gonna happen with this notion of shared parking that we always talk about when we talk about mixed use? Oh, somebody can use it during the day and somebody else can use it at night. What if the people don't go away during the day anymore, or most of them, or 30% or 50%? I mean, we have certain assumptions built into our thinking about how people use space that we might need to challenge. And finally, yes, when Tom, you started talking about Jennifer Street, when I look at the list of panelists, there's at least one transportation planner that I saw more than once parking on Patterson or wherever it was that person would park as they got onto the bus. And that person knows who they are. But yeah, and then, like I said, working your DOR, a third of the people I know, like, yeah, I park over near the hotels and I walk. And me, I always have meetings to go to. So I didn't mind paying $30 a month. That's nothing. I pay $30 a month to park there. I haven't parked there in 6 months. I don't care. I'm not going to cancel it. Let them clear the snow and have blood drives and do whatever. I don't mind. You know, I mean, I think that's part of our obligation as people who want to drive, is to pay for the maintenance of parking. Anyway, so that's my roundabout thing. And it all comes down to land use and what's it going to change? How's it going to change with COVID? Thank you.
Do you mind if I answer that COVID question?
Give it a try.
Yeah, so actually it's a fascinating question. When we look at our traffic volumes on University Avenue are about 65 to 70% of what they would be ordinarily. On East Washington, they're about 85%. Because of that, we're experiencing a lot of speeding and a lot more traffic deaths. So it's fundamentally changed things, and I don't think that this is a small blip. I think this will fundamentally change things for probably 10 years. But I'm also going to say that it's an unprecedented opportunity to build things the right way. You know, whereas I'm going to say implementing bus rapid transit and doing these changes, if we were to do it under normal circumstances, we would be 5 years late, right? But now we're still going to have these needs. They're just going to be in 2028, just not in 2023. And so it's almost like getting a head start to address the problems that we didn't address in 2012. So I view it as a huge opportunity, and we're already, when I'm looking at the, we're going to be submitting a report for the BRT running way, and we're going to be able to take a little bit more right of way and lanes for buses now, because vehicle, an example is Whitney Way. Whitney Way is borderline. Should it be 4 lanes or 2 lanes? Well, now with COVID, Whitney Way is 67% down. It's 60% of what it used to be. So it's easier to devote portions of the roadway to bikes and to buses now than it would have been a year ago. And so I view it as an opportunity to build the system that we need in 2028, and we have breathing room because of COVID.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I will go to...
Could I add something?
Sure.
Chair, thank you. I was just thinking about what Tom said about the use of streets as one of our prime resources for park and ride, essentially. And I think that one other important thing to consider is the kind of the economic calculation someone makes right now when they choose to commute, and then get it out of a car and into a bus. They're choosing a spot that makes sense for them with the time cost continuum, if that makes sense. Like, what gets me to work quickly enough and saves enough money? What neighborhood do I need to park in? And quite often, that's my neighborhood on the Isthmus. But I do think that with BRT, we will also see an opportunity to broaden the attractive park and rides on our street. It may start being that 2 miles out or 3 miles out, where frankly, we have more pavement, wider streets, more households that have off-street parking. And perhaps it's a more optimum use of our streets 2-3 miles out from downtown than it is on the Isthmus to kind of focus on commuter parking. And with BRT, the time savings will still be there, and that time cost continuum may still be, the right mix for someone to choose to utilize streets a little bit further out for the same reason they're using them on the Isthmus today. So I did just want to mention that I do think as transit is more convenient and quicker, we might be, using more of our streets, meaning further out for parking as well.
Thank you, Ms. Dowder. Good observation. Commissioner Spencer. Can people hear her? I can't. No, can't hear you. Sorry. Okay. Okay, we're getting close to our end time. We are going to have to delay the transit-oriented development, which is not a total surprise. I would like to try to sum up an unsum-upable kind of discussion. There are just so many permutations and ramifications of our parking and parking policy. I would like to ask, based upon some of this discussion, for staff to come back with some concepts of how we might move forward on this that really takes into account what we're aiming for on our transit-oriented development plan, so that we can make that as successful as possible. That very much intersects with other goals, really, of our on-street parking and our use of the street. So it's not an easy ask to ask staff to come back with some concepts, but I don't think we're going to be able to get to any more specifics of where we want to go tonight. I will look to commissioners. We have a few more minutes to provide more direction or insight, or to disagree with what I have said here. Alder Foster.
Thank you. I guess just one point would be that this has been a topic that we haven't made progress on at TPPB, for a number of different reasons, and staff have had a lot of different competing priorities. But I think at some point we should just consider, obviously there's a lot of overlap between transportation planning and land use, and that's why it's on the agenda tonight. But I guess just we should be thoughtful about and try and figure out, should these be joint conversations moving forward, or who should be taking the lead on it? Because I think there's a big enough gap in needing to define some of these high level strategies on parking policy and strategy that we should just be, I guess, clear about, where that's going to happen within our kind of board committee commission structure. So I just put that out there. And then the other thing that I think needs to be included in this discussion and conversation and thought process is, we've talked about BMT, and that's what's one of the key points in the kind of current purpose statement. We've talked about the impact on TDM and TODs, but I think we also need to have an upfront conversation about car ownership and storage, since we're talking about space and utilization of space, and that's another one, I think a really key dynamic and potential shifts in trends is car ownership itself. And so to what degree do our policies incentivize or disincentivize car ownership, in 1, 2, 3 vehicles, and to what degree should these programs align incentives so that where we have when we don't have a lot of extra space, there are disincentives to owning too many cars. So I just think that needs to be, it hasn't come up tonight, and it needs to be, I think, a really key component of the work going forward also.
Thank you, Alder. The other thing that I would add is, because it is such a complex kind of interaction, what we come up with, I would not expect to be necessarily the be all and end all, but we need to make some progress. We need to do some things that will help us get to our goals, knowing that things will change, evolve, and we may need to alter some of what we end up doing. So that would be one comment I would add on to what Alder Foster said. Alder Rummel.
Thank you. And thinking back to the first part of our conversation about the TDM, it was really helpful to look at, have that menu of things that you could do. And even if it isn't yet codified into an ordinance, even just some kind of written statement somewhere that we could have as part of our, training for plan commissioner. So when we're talking to someone not as big as Madison Yards, but somewhere smaller, did you look at X, Y, and Z? I mean, I know that somebody like Mr. Sundquist has that all in his brain because that's his field. But for the rest of us who aren't as, that's not our main thing, it just really helps to have a whole list of things at our fingertips to start. And so the more we talk about it, the more we normalize this is the new way forward. And then once we get to the point where we do come up with some kind of ordinance, it won't be like, oh, where did that come from, But we should start including it. Like I started including talks about glass whenever, knowing that the bird-friendly glass was coming. I started thinking about glass all the time. So maybe this is another way we start among ourselves just asking those questions. So I appreciate all the work that's in the presentations, and thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Cantrell.
I would also suggest that staff take a look at what of the streets within the city that they would suggest for the RO. I guess I would be interested in that, and getting back at Tom Lynch's comment about building, park and ride parking structures. I know that's very costly, but I never really thought about the public street being the commuter lots, and I think that's obviously a resource that you and Heather talked about. I think that is a great resource, but anyway, that's an opportunity that I think we have with the RO proposal that they didn't really think about. So I like this discussion. It really, it was a great discussion, even though it's just kind of just the initial part of it. But I think that it did provide at least some thought. So thank you very much.
And I would also say, as you think about things, if you have further input, I'm sure that Tom Lynch and Heather Stouter and Sabrina would welcome any further thinking as they go forward with their thinking and putting together some more concepts and proposals. So keep thinking about it, because it is a challenging area. Okay, I am going to say that is a wrap on this for now. Is there any other business by members? I don't see any raised hands or announcements, and anything from Heather or Tom that you would want to say to help wrap this up. Heather?
Sure. I just wanted to respond to the question about roles moving forward and sort of what staff is thinking in that regard. I mean, I think for the TDM and the on-street parking conversations, the Plan Commission has invaluable input into that process, given its connections to land use. However, I think at the staff level, at least, we've been thinking that the TPPB would likely end up being the lead on this ordinance. They're not part of the zoning code ultimately. And in fact, if we had a TDM ordinance, it would just be more of an administrative review, a lot of work up front to get things right and opportunities to change those over time. But it would obviate the need for a lot of discretionary Plan Commission discussions about TDM in the future. So I just want to be clear about that, and then differentiate it from TOD, transit-oriented development, which we'll talk about at a later date. That falls squarely within the zoning code, and I think the Plan Commission would be the lead on that. But I think Alder Foster is absolutely right that, TPPB, Plan Commission, we need to be talking about these things in tandem, because they do relate so closely. But I just wanted to take a really quick opportunity to at least share how staff has been thinking about sort of that division and where things, which committee or commission would actually end up being lead in the end.
And we're fortunate to have Commissioner Sundquist on the TPPB, which is a wonderful connection and link to help us have that communication and get to where we want to go with that. Tom, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
No, it's always a stimulating discussion, I think we were, after this discussion, I think I would love to just jump into the parking right away and think, there's some new ideas and the like. I just want to protect perhaps Sabrina a little bit. There's, through the budget amendment process, a bunch of potential new responsibilities might be being absorbed by the parking utility. So the next month or two, rather than jumping into looking to alternatives to RPO, we could probably get, our attorneys investigated, but there's some new dynamics regarding parking enforcement and the like that we might have to focus our attention on over the next month or two. So I just want to
thank you.
Provide a realistic timeline.
Okay. And thank you to, I know that there's been a lot of work done on what we saw tonight. So thank you for all of that work that was done, because clearly a lot of good concepts have been brought forward. So thank you for that. Anything else? Then I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Cantrell. Do we have a second? Seconded by Alder Lemmer. And unless I see a hand raised to object, I will assume unanimous consent. Okay, great. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.